Welcome to this explainer. When you really think about it, it sounds absolutely impossible. How does a simple shipment of tea in 1773 end up birthing a brand new nation? After all, it's just tea, right? Just a hot, everyday beverage. But as we're going to see today, this wasn't just about a drink. It was the literal spark, the catalyst for one of the greatest revolutions in human history.
So how exactly does a cup of tea start a revolution? It's a pretty fascinating mystery. Today, we're diving deep into how an everyday commodity pushed an entire powerful empire into war. We'll explore how, on one freezing December night, a group of frustrated colonists took extraordinary actions that would ultimately give birth to a completely new nation.
Section 1. An Empire in Debt and the Cost of the French and Indian War.
To really understand this building tension, we've got to rewind a bit. Imagine the situation. Britain had just won the French and Indian War. Great news for them, right? Well, actually, that victory came with a massive, crushing price tag. The British government was buried under an enormous mountain of debt. And to balance the books, Parliament made a fateful decision. They decided the American colonies should help foot the bill. So almost immediately, all these new taxes just started popping up across the colonies.
And that brings us to a phrase you've probably heard a million times: no taxation without representation. Now, it's really important to understand that the colonists didn't just hate giving up their hard-earned money. That wasn't the core issue. They were fighting for fundamental political rights. They firmly believed that something far, far more important was at stake here than just economics. As they quite logically argued, if we have no voice in Parliament, how can Parliament tax us? It makes total sense when you think about it. They recognized that without a voice, without a seat at the table, they were completely at the mercy of a government sitting an ocean away. Because of this dynamic, the tension between Britain and its colonies rapidly turned into a total powder keg. Section 2, Freedom over Tea, the Tea Act of 1773. Now, this is where things get really interesting. In 1773, Parliament passes the Tea Act. This officially allowed the struggling British East India Company to bypass the normal rules and sell their tea directly to the colonies. And this created a huge, mind-bending paradox. You see, the tea itself was actually cheaper than it was before, but the colonists, they outright rejected it. Why on earth would they reject cheaper tea? Well, because buying it meant silently surrendering their freedom. It meant officially accepting Parliament's supreme authority to tax them. To many Americans, accepting this cheap tea meant asking a terrifying question. What freedom were they going to tax next? Section 3, Night in Boston Harbor, December 16, 1773. So as darkness fell on December 16th, all this boiling debate finally reaches its breaking point. Guided by leaders like Samuel Adams, about 60 men, including members of the famous Sons of Liberty, make a bold move. They disguise themselves as Mohawk warriors, quietly march down toward Boston Harbor, and board the 3 British ships waiting out there in the freezing water. One by one, they carried chest after chest onto the deck, smashed them open, and dumped the contents right into the icy harbor. Get a load of this number, exactly 342 chests of tea. We are talking about an absolute fortune at the time, completely destroyed. For nearly 3 straight hours, chest after chest was plunged into the water, until tea literally covered the surface of the entire harbor. But here is a genuinely surprising fact, and it's probably my favorite detail from this whole event. This wasn't some chaotic, violent riot. It wasn't a looting spree. The protesters were incredibly disciplined. They damaged almost nothing except the tea itself. They actually went out of their way to replace a single broken padlock the very next day. Their message was crystal clear. This was a principled, intentional protest, not a mob.
Section 4. Britain Strikes Back, the Intolerable Acts.
Naturally, Parliament was absolutely furious. There was no way they were going to let that kind of blatant defiance go unpunished, so they unleashed a crushing wave of retaliation that came to be known as the Intolerable Acts, and the consequences were brutal. Boston Harbor was entirely closed. All trade was forcibly stopped, and new laws completely stripped away local authority. It was a systematic effort designed to just completely crush the rebellion in Massachusetts.
But guess what? That heavy-handed plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of dividing the colonies, Britain's punishment actually united them. Rather than isolating Boston and scaring the other colonies into submission, colony after colony looked at what was happening and decided to stand together in solidarity. A single protest in one harbor had rapidly transformed into a unified nationwide movement.
This single night in Boston forced the entire world to answer one ultimate provocative question.
who actually has the right to govern. The Boston Tea Party proved that history doesn't always begin with a massive clash on a battlefield. Sometimes it begins with ordinary people just flat out refusing to accept what they know is unfair. On one cold December night, a simple shipment of tea became the spark that ignited the American Revolution. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do.